Our next speaker is Dr. Pauline Belujon, over there, who is a native of France, got her Ph.D. in Bordeaux, and is currently now on the junior faculty at University of Pittsburgh, WPIC, be careful of this, in the lab of Tony Grace, one of the senior investigators, and on the Scientific Council of the Brain Behavior Research Foundation. Dr. Belujon is going to be talking about learned helplessness as an animal model of stress-induced depression and ketamine.
Thank you.
Okay. This thing moves. So.
Okay, thank you. You hear me? Yeah. First, I would like to thank the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation for inviting me today and giving me the opportunity to present as a Gloria Neidorf Memorial Lecture. So the typical symptoms of depression can be viewed as disrupted emotional, motivational, and cognitive states. And emotions such as sadness, helplessness, or pleasure are distinct physiological states that vary in intensity and arise in response to environment events that can be either rewarding or aversive. And those emotions are processed by the reward and the punishment system. So there are two core symptoms in depression, which are first, depressed mood, which is a reduction of interest and manifests as hypersensitivity to aversive events, and reduction and anhedonia, which is reduction of pleasure, which manifests as hypersensitivity to rewarding events. Sorry, is that better? Okay. So depression is one of the most common mental disorders in the United States. Here is some numbers. Its 12-month prevalence is about 7%. Its lifetime prevalence can go up to 17%, and its age of onset is about 32 years old. I think, yeah. Is it better? It's maybe two. Sorry. So 2/3 of NED patients are resistant to the first treatment, and treatment-resistant depression is described when depressed patients fail at getting better after 2 trials of antidepressant, and this is about 1/3 of the patients. And when antidepressants are effective, it can take weeks, if not months, to have the desirable effect. So there is a real need to find new treatments that are fast-acting and long-lasting. And ketamine is actually a promising drug since it rapidly relieves symptoms within hours and has long-lasting effects for about 2 weeks. But the mechanism are poorly understood. So to study the mechanism of ketamine, I'm using the learned helplessness model of depression, which is when uncontrollable events lead to the expectation that future events will also be uncontrollable. So for example, if you lose your job, you can have 2 types of reactions. Some people will get depressed for 1 or 2 days, but then they will cope and recover from it. However, other people won't recover. They will fail at trying to find a new job, and they will feel powerless to change their situation. And learned helplessness is actually described in humans, but also in rats and in animals. But I will talk learned helplessness in rats. So to induce learned helplessness in rats, so this will be the protocol, you actually place a rat, in a box which is closed, and you give them random and uncontrollable shock for an hour, and you test them for learned helplessness on day 2, 3, and 4, where this time the door opens, so when the shock is delivered, they can actually escape the shock by crossing twice the door. So with this protocol, you have 2 types of reaction. Some rats will perform well and escape, but some rats won't escape, and they will stay in the box until the shock terminates. And so they have like an increased number of failures to escape, and when they can escape, they have an increased latency to escape. And I'm going to test ketamine on those rats. So here is the results for the behavior. As I said, there is 2 types of behavior, non-helpless rats and helpless rats. So here is a difference between the two groups in the behavior. On the left, you have the number of failures to escape, and on the right, the latency to escape. As you can see, there is a significant difference between the two groups. If you treat the helpless group with ketamine, you can actually restore the behavior to a level that is comparable to the non-helpless rats. You have like a decreased number of failures and decreased latency to escape. So now to study the mechanism of ketamine, I'm actually interested in two different systems. The first system is a mesolimbic dopamine system, which is implicated in anhedonia, one of the core symptoms of depression. And in fact, here, so this is the dopamine coming from the ventral tegmental area. In depressed patients, a decreased level of dopamine has been described in the brain of depressed patients. So to study this system, I'm actually using electrophysiological recording. So neurons communicate with each other by electrical activities through the brain. And you can actually record this neuronal activity by placing an electrode in an anesthetized rat. So you have different parameters that you can measure. If you lower an electrode in the brain, you can actually count the number of active cells, in yellow here. And this is particularly important for the dopamine system because the number of active cells is linked to the level of dopamine in the brain. So the more cells are active, the more dopamine will be released in the brain. You can also record a single neuron and its neuronal activity, and this is an example of a recording, and you can look at the firing pattern and the firing rate of this particular neuron. So this is the results here. So on the left, you have the firing rate, in the middle, the firing pattern, and the number of active cells. And you can see here that there is no difference between non-helpless rats and rats that stayed in their home cage. However, when you look at helpless rats, you have a significant decrease of the population activity of the dopamine system, meaning that there could be a decrease in the tonic dopamine release in those rats. If we treat those rats with ketamine, we can actually reverse and restore the population activity. So dopamine is a potent modulator of another system that I'm interested in, which is the hippocampus accumbens pathway. And this pathway is involved in the regulation of appropriate response to stress and in context-dependent regulation via focused attention. And in depressed patients, depressed patients have been shown to have abnormal focus on internal state to the exclusion of their surroundings. So that might involve this pathway. So to show the same schematic than before, if you place an electrode, to study this pathway, we actually placed a stimulating electrode in the hippocampus, and we recorded in the accumbens. And this is an example where you have an evoked spike due to the stimulation of the hippocampus. And when you do high-frequency stimulation of this pathway, you can induce an increase of the synaptic efficacy in this pathway called long-term potentiation. And in control animals, this long-term potentiation is right here, is dopamine dependent. However, in helpless rats, when we do the same experiment, we did not induce long-term potentiation, but we actually induce the opposite synaptic plasticity, which is long-term depression. And if we treat those rats with ketamine, we can actually restore the synaptic plasticity which was observed in control animals. So to summarize, helpless rats showed disruption of the dopaminergic system, which is linked to a decreased tonic release of dopamine in the brain and disruption of synaptic plasticity in the hippocampus accumbens pathway. And those disruptions are reversed by prior administration of ketamine. So this provides new insight into the mechanism of anhedonia, which involved the dopamine system, but also rumination. So rumination is a phenomenon where depressed patients will focus on their own distress, its causes, its consequences, and that involves the hippocampus accumbens pathway. This work also provides a better understanding of the role of ketamine at a system level. Many works have studied the molecular mechanism, but this work actually provides new information on the effect of ketamine on different areas involved in depression. So ketamine is a promising drug, but it's not the right answer to treat depression because of some side effects, such as short-term symptoms of psychosis, or its potential abuse as a recreational drug. But real improvement has been shown after a single injection of ketamine, so this could actually help screen and find novel treatment strategies that are similar to ketamine for affective disorder. Thank you. Oops. Sorry.
Thank you for another excellent presentation. Thought it might be helpful to talk a little bit about ketamine findings in humans to put the importance of this project in context. And I have to initially declare a conflict of interest in that I have a patent pending for the use of ketamine in treatment-resistant depression. So you have to understand that as well. The original finding of ketamine in depressed patients occurred when I was at Yale, and John Crystal and I were leading a depression research group where we found in 8 patients, to our surprise, so there was serendipity involved, that ketamine is a rapidly acting antidepressant drug in patients with depression, that it works within a couple of hours, and in about 70% of the patients who have failed other treatments, you get a response within a couple of hours. Then I went to NIH, worked with Carlos Zarate and Husseini Manji and others, and that work was then replicated with a single dose, and it's now been replicated all over the world. So that I think it's pretty close to being a fact that ketamine is a rapidly acting antidepressant. Now then there's the question of whether you can maintain the response, because it's not like an antibiotic. You don't give ketamine once and then somebody is cured from depression. So there have now been several studies, including one done by our group at Mount Sinai, where we've given ketamine every other day, IV, for 2 weeks, and we can maintain the initial response for that 2 weeks, and then typically the response continues for another couple of weeks. So the challenge right now is how do you maintain the ketamine response? Now that needs a lot of attention, because we don't see ketamine as being a treatment that you would give for years, but it can be somewhat akin to ECT for treatment-resistant depression, that you can get people better, you can get it better for a number of weeks, and then we need to figure out how to maintain the response. Just a word about side effects. In my opinion, but I have a conflict of interest here, in looking at the well over 100 patients that have gotten ketamine, it is actually quite well tolerated. And when you ask the patients who have gotten better with ketamine, it is a treatment that they want to continue to receive. So I personally think that it can be given safely and could be a very helpful treatment in general for treatment-resistant depression if we can figure out a way how to maintain the response. This work is an example of going from the clinic back to the lab, because it really wasn't thought that that ketamine or drugs that have a major effect on glutamate would be a new class of antidepressants. But since the observation that ketamine has this antidepressant effects, a lot of basic science laboratories, including like you just heard today, are now interrogating what is the mechanism by which ketamine could be working. And I think this is the first time I've heard that dopamine might be involved. So this is potentially a very important study. Other factors that have been identified related to the ketamine response, including changes in neuroplasticity in the brain involving trophic factors, even pathways that have typically been identified to be involved in cancer. The mTOR pathway has been identified. For those of you who are interested in this area, the October 4th issue of Science There was a special issue on depression, and Ron Duman and George Agajanian wrote a review article basically focusing on how might ketamine be working. I think the learned helplessness model that was described in the presentation is a very good animal model, as animal models go for depression. It does pick up on anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure, which is a key component of human depression. I find it very interesting that ketamine seems to reverse the effects of learned helplessness on reduced dopamine function in reward pathways. And the question that I would have as a translational science researcher is, how can this possibly be studied in patients? And we should maybe begin to look at, how can we maintain the ketamine response with dopamine-related agonists. I don't think ketamine works only by dopamine, because dopamine agonists don't have the same kind of rapid and really robust antidepressant effect as ketamine, but it raises the possibility that among the other mechanisms being studied, that we should now include dopamine as a possibility. This time I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions. Yes.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
So the question is, can ketamine, or does ketamine, work in bipolar disorder, and would it have a risk for inducing mania? There is a study led by Carlos Arati and the team at NIMH that has looked at single doses of ketamine in bipolar depression, and they have found a robust antidepressant effect with that single dose. They maintained, I believe, the patients on mood stabilizers, and by doing that, they didn't see a major problem with inducing mania. There have been a couple of case reports of giving ketamine to thought to be unipolar patients where there was a hypomanic response. So it would be something you definitely have to look into. The logical next step right now, and I know some groups are interested in doing this, is to start giving repeated doses of ketamine to bipolar patients to see if you can get them in remission, and then maybe mood stabilizers will then prevent relapse. And that's critical because of the findings of the large NIH studies that showed that traditional antidepressants might not have a robust effect in bipolar depression.
Yeah. Repeat the question. Basically, what is the role of the hippocampus in the brain? Right. So the hippocampus projects. I'm interested more on the ventral hippocampus, but there is also the dorsal hippocampus. So there is a huge role in learning and memory. And in my what I'm interested in, those projections to the accumbens are actually really important in the context dependent processing of information. So that's why it has a really important role in all the processing of information that you receive from the environment, and that will process that. Does it answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
What are the downsides to ketamine other than the short-term psychosis?
So I think you will be.
Yeah, what are the downsides to the use of ketamine aside from the short-term psychosis? Actually, I would qualify by saying that at the doses that are given for depression, short-term psychosis is actually quite rare. You can get dissociative phenomenon. I think the question, one key question with repeated use of ketamine is that there is some basic science work done by John Olney in particular at WashU that looked at high doses of drugs like ketamine, NMDA receptor antagonist, and saw some evidence at high doses with prolonged administration for neurotoxicity. So we have to determine whether or not, at the doses used for the treatment of depression in humans, whether that would be a problem.
I think we'll move on.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you.